I went into a little spelunking in the Journal Star files today, and this is at least the 6th big show by Dan that I've written something about. All the previous 5, the procedure was I'd come and look at it for a while, Dan would come, and then we'd talk about it, and I'd ask him questions about whatever. Buck short-circuited that, and so what you're going to hear tonight is the questions that I probably would have asked Dan Wednesday afternoon when I came in here and looked at this. And the first question I'm going to ask is, what is up with those hands coming out of the painting?
Those hands he's referring to are on the back wall. It's the first and only three-dimensional painting that I've ever done. I don't plan to do another one. That was a lot of work. I had an assistance from a ceramics major in the Department of Art and Art History, Phelan Strong. Phelan, where are you? She's back over there. She loaned me her right hand, which was very generous on her part. She loaned me her right hand 3 times, as a matter of fact. And she still we call her Lefty now. That hand has art historical references, for one thing. Anybody recognize this hand gesture? We know the historians do. This is a familiar gesture from Leonardo da Vinci's work. He used it a half-dozen times in his paintings and drawings. So that I have fun relating art historical pieces to my time. The first one I ever did in that venue was a painting by Rembrandt called Night Watch. Of course, after they cleaned the darn thing, they found that it should be called Day Watch. It had layers of varnish on it. But I did a painting of Night Watch in 1962, some 50 plus years ago. And that was rather successful. It received a major award in an important regional exhibition back then. So I just said, well, if that works, I guess I'll do it a few more times. So there are several instances of that in here. But the painting, the title of the painting is called Crown or Clown Prince of Gesture. And that relates to a historical reference about me. I go back to the dawn of time in art schools. In my freshman year in the School of Art at the University of Iowa, a major competition was a drawing exhibition that was held in the spring every other year. And that was the first, I hit the year, my freshman year was the biennial year for that drawing competition. It was open to all undergraduate students. The undergraduate students did not pick the work. Drawing faculty picked the work. Of all the works that were in that exhibition, there were only 2 by freshmen. One, a very elaborate charcoal rendering of I don't remember what, and my drawing, which was, I called it a scribbled drawing. It was a gesture drawing of a figure. Well, the drawing faculty proclaimed it as one of the finest gesture drawings they had ever seen. I said, I think that's just scribbles. Well, of course, what did I know? I was a freshman. But at any rate, that sort of cemented the notion in my head that I probably was in the right place, that I probably should be an art major. I enjoyed it. I did it in high school. I had 3 instructors in high school in art, and they encouraged me to go on with it. And so I was in my hometown of Iowa City, so all I had to do was walk across the river to the School of Art. At any rate, my fellow classmates began referring to me as the Prince of Gesture, facetiously, of course. But since then, I have incorporated that gesture mark in virtually all of my work. It's a very kinetic kind of line. It has a lot of motion to it, a lot of energy to it. It's not at all static. It's something I enjoy doing. And in my paintings, which I paint for two distances, one close up where you can see the painting process, the application of paint, the surface, and then distance where hopefully all that stuff comes together and makes some kind of visual sense. But in all of those, you can see those gesture marks through the canvas. And some of the more recent canvases, I've actually used graphite to make those gesture marks. Graphite as in pencil. I typically use a brush that's lost all of its bristles and is down to the metal ferrule. And that makes a nice incised mark on the surface of the painting. But that helps to give it another level of application by the artist. And it also, for me, it energizes the surface. So that's a long way to say that's what that hands is all about.
Well, while you're talking about the process, two things that they're consistent, I guess, to some measure in your work, is this sort of abstract and figurative in the same image that sort of collide or cohere or both or neither. Right. And that's one, and then you're working from, at least in the fashion series, it starts with a photograph or some other referent.
Right.
How, A, how long have you been doing that? And B, how do you pick the subject and pick the picture? And then how does it transform? Because what you see up here, those legs, I'm sure look nothing like the legs that were in the photograph that they began with.
Exactly. I guess I've been dealing with that aspect for quite some time, beyond this fashion series, which incidentally is the largest, longest series of works I've ever done. There are 47 works in the fashion series here. It's called Fashions in the Abstract. Going back several years, I found it fascinating to try to take the literal, the representational, and convert it into the abstract to the point where both aspects were visible, were attainable by the viewer. In this particular series, I went through hundreds, no, thousands of images. Went through all kinds of fashion magazines. I didn't take any illustration as it existed. I did a lot of cropping. In this series, there were three factors that weighed on the development of the paintings. One was the orientation or direction of the image. Instead of taking it in the literal upright position, I would often turn it on a bias on the side or invert it upside down. Secondly, cropping, which is familiar to the people in the journalism business. Taking out the leading identifiable edges or contours of the subject so it no longer has a ready reference point. And third, changing the scale of the subject, enlarging it to the point where it's almost recognizable. That's visible in a couple of images there. The fashions over there, the head study, and back over on the left side, the very far left side, is actually a tie and a shirt. Very close up. So while they take on an abstract appearance, if you look at them in a different way, for example, this painting right over Kent's head, which I hope stays there and doesn't fall on because it's kind of heavy. If you assume that the right side is the upside, then it begins to make a little sense. That's a hairline that is on the left edge, and that's a draped coat from the head down. That's I guess that's the neckline up there too, part of the neckline. I did that some time back. So by using some or all of those three factors, that representational subject matter becomes an abstraction from reality.
Why did you choose fashion?
Because of the variety, the riot of colors, of patterns, of shapes, of lines, the characters of those fashion images. It's also, Kent, a form of still life,
Okay.
when you think about it.
Sure.
A fashion model, of course, a mannequin is completely still, that you see in a department store window. They don't move at all. But even fashion models, the only time they move is when they're walking down a runway to display the coat or the jacket or the hat or whatever. And so I consider those walking still lives, which is one of the prime categories of subject matter that artists, that two-dimensional artists work with. They work with figures, still lifes, landscapes, basically, with a lot of permutations off of that. So that's how that evolved.
Is that fashion route, and you talked about the color, I mean, this is about as wide a palette as you're going to see in any show, right? I mean, you go from the brightly colored to this, you know? And was that part of the palette, or is it just?
Yes, that was intentional, to explore as wide a range of colors as possible. I've always been pretty much known as a colorist. Been working with colors my entire professional career, and I really wanted to exploit that color sense in this series. And I thought with fashions, I could really do that to the nth degree.
As you do that, and working in the series, okay? Do you consider, okay, I did this with this colors here, and I need to do this somewhere else, or is it just come from what you get as you've abstracted the image?
It comes from that particular image, that particular subject, the scale that I'm working with, and the sequence of colors that I think will work best as a painting. Because first of all, it is a painting. I grew up, my formative years as an art student were when abstract expressionism was just coming to the fore in New York, the AE school, so to speak, consisting of Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, Mark Rothko, several more. And those artists had an impact on me. I was not an abstract painter at all early on. I was strictly representational. But what I did gather from those artists was the important characteristic of paint. Their paintings were not about anything specific in particular. They often were derivative from subject matter. Willem de Kooning worked from landscapes, but you wouldn't know it to look at a lot of those paintings of his. But he did work from landscapes. But he was principally concerned about the deployment of paint, getting the paint worked around the surface and getting it to mobilize itself on that surface. To paraphrase Gertrude Stein, those AE painters, their dictum was a painting is a painting is a painting. Before it's anything else, it's first and foremost, it has a physicality as a painting, a surface of paint. And that's what I eventually subscribed to, then, that paint, quality of paint on the surface.
How do you know how it's going to end, or do you know how it's going to end up when you start?
I usually do. I didn't always. I did a lot of scraping decades ago, but I eventually got a handle on things, so I didn't have to do a lot of repetition. I sort of subscribed to the Frans Hals school of painting. He was a prominent Flemish artist in the 17th century, and he believed in the alla prima style of painting. In other words, the first stroke is the last stroke. Don't embellish it, don't add on to it, don't take away from it, let it be. So I paint wet into wet. The surface is wet. That's why I use oil paint principally. Acrylic dries too quickly and watercolor dries too quickly. But oil paint doesn't. Sometimes it seems like it takes half of forever for that damn surface to dry. But at any rate, working wet into wet, it allows me to let the paint maneuver itself on the surface. And generally the first stroke now is the last stroke in a particular passage on the surface.
Do you avoid disaster now? I
did a disaster series, Ken.
I'm aware of that. I wrote about it.
That was something else again. Yes, I generally do. If somehow a painting does not turn out the way I anticipated or expected it would, and I do a lot of pre-planning. The paintings look spontaneous, and that's the effect that I'm trying to achieve. I want them to have spontaneity. I want them to look fresh. I don't want them to look tired. And so I strive mightily to make them have that fresh look by doing a lot of preparatory work. I generally do preparatory drawings, studies. I think about the color ranges, plan that out in advance. But there are oftentimes happy accidents that occur in the paintings too that I wasn't expecting at the outset that occur. But if, for example, a painting doesn't work out the way I wanted it to, it won't leave my studio. Nobody else will ever see it. Because I believe that I'm my own best critic. At this juncture in my career, I believe I know what works and what doesn't work. And if it doesn't work for me, I don't care whether it works for anybody else or not. I won't be satisfied with it, so I don't care what anybody else thinks about it. You won't see it.
Just so you know, there are not dozens and dozens and dozens of paintings sitting in Dan's studio the last time. So most of them work.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about the reference to the art history and the two up there, the transgressions on Durer. Yeah. I'm guessing he'd think they're real transgressions. That connects back with your previous work.
Yeah.
To some measures, this painting like that has a direct connection and visually to me to some of you. Do you feel that continuity that runs through, or is each series separate from the other?
No, I think each series that I've done over the years, and I've done dozens of series over the years, one group of works sort of leads itself naturally into a next series. It suggests the next series, and that next series suggests the following series for me. Because the process of art is a matter of evolution, of development. My development and my painting's developments. The paintings that I did 40 years ago don't look at all like the paintings I did even 20 years ago. The paintings I did 30 years ago don't look like the paintings I did 10 years ago. 10 years ago don't look very much like the paintings I do now. I pride myself on learning from what I do. The painting process itself is an education, and that allows me to go on, to move on to new work. That's why I'm never stymied as to what I'm going to do next. Some artists seem to have problems. Well, I just don't know where I'm going to go from here. I'm fortunate in never having had that problem. I've always worked ahead. I've always worked 1 or 2 years ahead of where I'm at. Now that's frustrating in a way because I'm working on the current series and yet I'm thinking about something that's going to happen 2 years from now. But I have to bite my nails and just bide my time and think, well, I'll get to that eventually. So it is, it's an evolving process, as I said, and it's been a learning learning experience for me all these years.
Dan and I have lunch every month or so, and a lot of the times we talk about comics. And I don't know that I've ever asked you this question directly. Is there influence of comic art in your art?
There has been from time to time. In my last exhibition that was held in Williamsburg, where this gallery was previously, I had a painting called Kaboom, which was a tribute, homage to American comics. And I suppose that related to the fact that I was a collector of original comic strip and comic book artwork. A collection that my wife and I put together over a span of 25, 30 years, and that we eventually donated to the Sheldon Museum of Art. Because I thought that collection belonged in the Midwest. There are enough collections of that kind in the eastern seaboard, but we needed something in the Midwest. And the comics influenced me early on, Kent. As a child, I was enraptured, not so much by comic books. I didn't get into comic books, but comic strips. In the daily newspaper and in the Sunday newspapers. I was a newspaper carrier for several newspapers because I kept losing my job because they said, you're spending too much time reading the comics page. You're supposed to deliver those newspapers.